Hello, hello. Just getting started. Hi. How are you all doing tonight or today or this morning or tomorrow or whenever it is for all of you? How are you? Hello. This is my first time using my kind of real little stand, and so we're going to see how it works. Let's see. If it falls over suddenly at any point, I am sorry. Hi, welcome. Oh, thank you. I did not actually dry it. This is apparently what happens when I just put product in it, and then by product I mean just some random mousse I found in the house, and then this is what happens because I'm super, super lazy. These do get saved. They get saved onto IGTV, and then a few days later they get uploaded onto YouTube. But it's really, really nice to see people joining live. It's kind of always an amazing highlight. I admit that it always stresses me out a little bit because I'm like, oh God, is anyone going to come? But yes, they do get uploaded later. Yes, Addie LaRue in the back right there. Hello, everybody. Just waiting for Samantha Shannon to join us. Sam, if you're here, you just have to wave at me or ask to be also one of the hosts. I don't know how technology works. I, in fact, have made a point of having done this for a few months now of never figuring out how to do it better. Just because it's not my job. So you can just get me. There we go. Hold on. Here's Samantha coming. Here we go. Wait. Let's see if it works. It will be very exciting if it works. I really hope that it works.
Hi!
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. You're in London, yeah?
I'm in London. Are you in France?
I am in France.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I have my really sad cup of tea here. So it's normally whiskey at this hour for me, but I had some box wine earlier, so we'll switch to water.
Amazing. I have coffee in a wine glass because I guess I'm a manic pixie dream girl or something. I have absolutely no idea.
I love it. It's so good to see your face, though.
Yeah, you too. I think the last time I saw you was in LA, right?
Yes, I was just about to say, last time we saw each other was for drinks and snacks in an LA bar when the world was a very different place.
It really was. It was a lovely place. I really liked that world. But yeah, it's really lovely to see you. And it's really lovely to be doing an event. I literally haven't done anything since March. So
well, thank you for doing this with me. I've got my book
here.
I've got Priory right here. So let's see if I can put the two of them together. The chunky little paperback.
So chunky, my God.
It is a chunky thing. I brought it with me from Scotland. And it is just, it's also just beautiful. I feel like for anyone who for some reason doesn't realize how pretty this book is in person.
It is so beautiful. I mean, it is chunky, but compared to the hardback, I mean, when I showed it off.
I had it digital, and then I will admit, I waited to get the paper book until it was in this size because the bigger one was it was so big.
I was almost embarrassed when it arrived because it was so big. I was like, this is just not allowed. How has someone allowed me to write this size? It was just, I mean, I think it was the paper they printed it on. I think Bloomsbury likes that really thick paper because I see books by Sarah J. Maas and they look thinner even though, but I think maybe they use different paper.
It is a really, just to give everybody the tactile experience, it is a very nice quality paper.
It's lovely.
Also, how you know that you're fancy because when you're not this fancy, they'll tell you the book can only be this long because the printing cost. So
I think we actually got really close to, I remember I was cutting from the end of the book and Bloomsbury were like, if you go over a certain amount, it suddenly becomes kind of expensive. So if you could maybe not do that. And I was like, sure, I'll try my best to keep it below. I think it got to something like 290,000 words at some point.
That's how you can tell that you're existing at a different word count. Because for my fantasy novels, the word count threshold that they wanted to keep under was 180.
Oh, wow.
There's one budget creep up at 180 and then one at 300. And so you're obviously on the Brandon Sanderson creep up level. I'm down here on some other creep up level that they're like, could you just make it shorter?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think because I'm working on another Priory related book right now, and Bloomsbury were like, if you could keep it shorter, and I was like, don't know if I can do that. I'm so sorry.
I don't want to jump out of order here because believe it or not, I have a structure, but like we will talk about the fact you don't just write long books because I don't feel like the Bone Season books are quite as long.
They're not, no.
But then you have this tome, so I do want to talk to you about like the difference in, I'm making a note for myself because that's where we are, like in book lengths. And if this, let's just skip ahead. Hold on.
Yeah.
Why, like, did you always know? And like, did you always want? And was it ever daunting?
It was daunting from the beginning. I think I wasn't trying to make it long. I always have to say this to people because I think some people are like, did you really need to make it this size, Samantha? Was it necessary? And I'm like, well, yes, it was, because it's mostly just the fact that there are 4 perspective characters. So it's essentially telling 4 stories. If it had been 2 perspective characters, it would not be as long as it is. So when I realized it was going to be 4 stories and the scope of the story I was trying to tell, so it's a very global story, you know, it's going to all different countries, it's going to, you know, each character has their own individual story, but then that has to tie into the larger story. So it just got longer and longer, and I was starting to panic as I wrote it. I was like, are they going to let me write a book this big? Because all of, like you say, the Bone Season books, I think the biggest one is the Mime Order, and that's about 154,000.
So they're like, for what they are, they're quite felt.
Yeah, they are. I mean, the songwriting, which is the third one, it was interesting because I had an editor for that who was a freelance YA editor, and they're actually adult books. So I had this weird experience where I was writing an adult book but being edited by a YA editor, and it was getting thinner and thinner. And she was like, yeah, do we really need this? Could we tighten this up? Could this be cut? And I was like, oh, wow, this is really... And it was funny because it's the Bone Season book that took me the longest to write. And it arrived and it was tiny.
So here's the thing. Do you think some of that was that it was your first, or do you think some of that was just the story that you were trying to tell?
I think I guess it's because, so the Bone Season as a whole is a really big story, but because it's a 7-book series, you know, it's spread very nicely, and also it's first person and it's only told from one perspective. So it's relatively easy for me to write you know, a pretty complex and interesting story, but keep it to a relatively small word count. Whereas Priory just did not allow me to do that. Like, I was up to the point where I would normally have finished a Bone Season book, and I'm thinking, yeah, this story is really not done, is it?
Yeah. So, but so I know, and I feel like you and I have talked about this, but this concept that you always wanted it to be a certain number of books, but did you always want it to be 7? First question.
Mm-hmm.
And second question is, like, did that ever feel draining, or did it always feel like the form served?
Sorry, what was the second question? Are you cut off at the end?
Sorry, like, did the form, like, after you committed to 7, or after you had an idea, did it become a constraining thing, or did it continue to serve you to have that structure?
It's always served me relatively well, actually, the 7 books. I always knew it was going to be 7, mostly because the number 7 kept coming up in the series. You know, it's set in a place called 7 Dials, and there are 7 orders of clairvoyance, and it just kept repeatedly coming up. And when I thought about the length of the story, I thought that that was the appropriate number of books. I've always been able to see the rough trajectory of the series in my head, and I could picture, you know, being able to allocate each part of the story into 7. So it always felt fine to me, and that's never changed. I think the only place where it became a little bit challenging was the songwriting was my difficult book. And I don't know if you've had one of these, but I feel like every author I know has had that book that nearly destroyed them.
Yeah.
And I'll probably expand on this later. But the songwriting was that book for me. And I realized that it was the only book in the series where it felt more like it was there to bridge 2 books rather than a book of its own. So it felt more like it was something to bridge the Mime Order and the Mask Falling, which is the book coming out in February. Yeah. So it just ended up feeling I had to find a proper story and a backbone for it. And fortunately I did, but it took me quite a while to find that. That's the only time where I feel that it sort of shook a little bit. But generally speaking, it's really worked quite well, I think.
For me, that's every direct sequel.
Right,
like,
yeah.
Anytime I'm writing the direct sequel, it doesn't matter if it's like 2 books in the series, 3 books in the series, 4 books, like it doesn't matter. Like the Unbound, Vengeful, A Gathering of Shadows, like they're always the second books. And I think it's because there's so much pressure because you have to recreate newness and up the stakes. And you're right, when you're writing a longer series, there are books that have to also serve the purpose of being narrative bridges.
Yeah, absolutely. The second books are always so hard, and it's like, and it is that sort of classic cliche of the second book syndrome. And also just having to, I think with me, the second book in the series is the first time you have to sort of recap the series for someone, because
I hate it.
yeah, and I think I saw Jay talking about this the other day, Jay Christoph, and he's like, we should normalize trying to actually add a recap to books, because it is really difficult and a certain skill to try and weave a whole story into each book every time without making it sound like the character's just sitting down with you and being like, here's what's happened so far. It needs to sound organic.
I need previously on, because seriously, the amount of energy that I spend trying to recap a story in the least amount of words possible, so that I'm not moving backwards as well as forward. It's like a bane of my existence. Like, it's truly my least favorite part of the creative process.
Yeah, it is a nightmare. And for this, the mask balling, because there's been a 4-year gap in the series,
which we'll talk about.
We will talk about, and I will cry. But there's been a 4-year gap. So this time I decided that I was going to have mercy, and I was going to add a character list to the end, because I did that with Priory and it was really helpful for people. Yeah. And basically I've designed the character list to also work as a recap. So if you go to a character, you'll see basically everything they've done in the story so far. So I'm hoping that's kind of a nice balance.
Very clever.
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, we've jumped so far ahead now that I'm
sorry.
Bring it back to the beginning. These chats tend to take like a variety of forms, so there'll be a lot of like amorphous moving through the narrative channels that we want, because I have some very specific questions.
Sure.
But I try to start every interview with like the origin story. So I know that like your initial publication was very well publicized because you were so young and it was such a big deal. But I'd love if you could just kind of walk us through your brief previously on style origin story of how did you get from like child Samantha Shannon to where you are now?
Oh wow, it is quite a story. So I've probably been writing since I was about maybe 9, and then I started writing seriously as a hobby when I was 12. I didn't realize, but I was actually writing like proto fan fiction at the time, because I didn't know what fan fiction was. But I was always writing sequels to my favorite films and stuff. Like I used to write sequels to Dragonheart, which was my favorite film ever. And yeah, so that was kind of where I started. And then I did write little novels when I was kind of 12 as well. Funnily enough, one about dragons. And yeah, so I did that, and I pretty much wrote since then. And then when I was about 15, I wrote my first full-length novel, which was like a proper sit down and commit to a project. It was 200,000 words long, and I wrote that probably between the ages of about 15 and 17. So that was called Aurora, and I call it Twilight with Aliens, because that was basically what it was. And I tried to get that published, and that was when I was like seriously, learning about what an agent was and what a publisher was, all of that kind of thing. And I was really committed to it. Like I was properly following all the agent's instructions. I actually walked the manuscript myself to some agents in London, like rather than post it. Like I was posting it through the letterbox. Like I thought that was going to make a difference.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, so I did that, and it didn't go anywhere, fortunately, because it was not the greatest book ever. So I kind of gave up on it. And then when I was 19, I did an internship in London at a literary agency, and the literary agency was in Covent Garden. And there's a really beautiful little district in Covent Garden called Seven Dials, and it sells like crystal balls and tarot cards and that kind of thing. And I got this idea for a sort of modern day witch hunt and having clairvoyance as kind of something to do with a dystopia. So I went away and I wrote this while I was at university in my second year, and I just wrote the whole draft in about 6 months. It just poured out of me, which doesn't happen very often, but it just flowed out. And I was really, really nervous about sending it to an agent again, because I've been a little bit bruised with Aurora. I was so young at the time, you'd really take it hard. So then we had the writer Ali Smith come to our college, and she was offering to give writers feedback on their work. And I was so nervous because she was known to be, not to hold back in her feedback. And I was like, oh my God, she's going to tell me I'm the worst.
Yeah.
It's going to be awful. So I sent her the first chapter of The Bone Season, and I went with my notebook, and I was so determined I was going to take notes and it was going to be great. And I sat down and she just said, I think this is brilliant and you should try to get it published. And I was like, really? Like, am I in a dream? What is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I contacted the agent that I had worked for, and I wasn't expecting him to represent it, but I just said, I don't suppose you would know any agents who would be interested in this. And he said, oh, I'll have a look at it first, and then you can send it out to other people, obviously. And to my surprise, he wanted to represent it. So I was like, oh, okay, fine, this is great, because that meant I wasn't on a slush pile. I just jumped in there, which was very lucky. And then it went straight out to publishers. Bloomsbury was one of the main publishers that wanted it, so I ended up going with them because the team was super enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And then began the strangest 2 years of my whole life. So I think I got the book deal in 2012 when I was 20. So I wrote the book when I was 19. I got the deal when I was 20. And so the most extraordinary thing happened where, I think I watched some of your chat with Danielle, and she said that some people come out of the gate with gilded wheels. And I thought that was a really lovely way of expressing how debuts get treated differently. Mm-hmm. My wheels were very gilded because suddenly the whole world seemed to be talking about me. I was on like so many news articles, and I thought this was perfectly normal for a debut. I thought this.
But that's the problem with having no points of, as a debut, no points of comparison, because you're like, well, this is just what it is.
Yeah, I was like, this is what it is, and it's absolutely terrifying. Because I didn't have any friends in publishing at the time. I didn't know anyone. I'd come completely from the outside. So I just had this bizarre year where I was doing stuff like Vogue and the New York Times magazine, and I was speaking at like live Australian news and stuff, and it was crazy. It was the craziest 2 years of my life, and it was both wonderful and extremely anxiety inducing, like to the point that it actually gave me anxiety. By the end of it, I was kind of a bit of a nervous wreck because all of it was on me personally. It wasn't anything to do with the book or the content of the book. It was because I was a young... Oh, there you are.
Son of a bitch. Okay. I live in the middle of the French countryside, and we just had a neighborhood like power outage.
Yeah.
And it clicked off for like, it does this for like a microsecond, and then it takes like 2 minutes to reboot. I'm so glad you couldn't hear my audio that whole time, because I was cussing up a goddamn storm. Okay, I'm so sorry.
I carried on just to...
Okay, great, wonderful. Okay, so obviously super weird, gilded wheels process, but I really do want to find out, and tell me if you've already said some of this, but I want to ask about, the psychology of that, because we talk a lot about, obviously you and I had kind of opposite comeuppances in that, like, I started very wee, and then like built with every book, and there's a downside to that, but there's also an upside, which is that you're kind of betting against yourself against a very slowly rising tide, you know? And I feel like, what was the pressure like? And did it make creativity even more difficult? Because I find like even the pressure I put on myself these days makes creativity very difficult. What was it like trying to create the sequels in an environment where, you know, as you realized that this wasn't normal?
It was terrifying, and it got like ever more frightening, because I was also aware by that time that I had an audience, so I needed to create the sequel, but the pressure after that was just terrifying. And I was saying when you were gone that there had been this relentless pressure that I was tagged with this label, the next J.K. Rowling.
Oh, I remember.
I know, everyone remembers. It was awful, because it sounds like this really dazzling thing, you know, like, oh wow, like the next David Beckham for a young footballer or whatever. But actually I was like, of course I'm not the next J.K. Rowling. Like, nobody's gonna be as successful as J.K. Rowling just randomly like that.
Also, you're the first Samantha Shannon. Like, it's such a weird thing. You're like, let you be you.
I know, I was desperate to just be myself, and at the time it was just this crushing pressure, and I was saying, like, I did an interview shortly afterwards, and someone basically literally said to me on the radio, you weren't the next J.K. Rowling after all, were you? And I'd just become a New York Times bestseller, and I was really proud of myself. And someone was just like, yeah, you weren't actually that, were you? And I was like, oh, thank you very much. So I think I have quite mixed feelings about kind of debuts having all that pressure put on them, and especially young debuts. And I think it could very easily have destroyed my career before I was even out of the gate, because you know, and also if someone's whole marketability is based on them being young,
Yeah.
that goes. I'm not referred to as the young Samantha Shannon anymore. I've gone past that at some point.
I always say I have the biggest, as someone who also started, I started before you, but I was 2 years older than you when I started. But as someone who still had a bit of that fetishizing of youth, I had like a complete nervous breakdown when I turned 30, and I couldn't figure out why, until a friend said, it's because you're not a prodigy anymore. Like when you turn 30, you don't get to be a prodigy. You're just someone who's good at their job. Yes. And I do feel like it was a little much a relief to have the fetishizing go away and to just get to be an author and not like a young or like an author despite their age.
Absolutely, it's such a relief just to be out of that now. Like I'm 28 now. I'm going to turn 29 this year, and I do have that fear of turning 30, and I think it is mostly because of that. Because suddenly I'm like, oh, like you say, publishing is so obsessed with youth. Like we do all these success before 30 articles, and we do all these awards which just for 30s and unders, and suddenly you get out of that. And I think for us as people who got the book deals really young, it's even more intense. So,
definitely.
Yeah, terrifying process. And I'm just so grateful that readers still came back to my books and that I still have a career after that, because it could so easily have just destroyed me.
Well, but also part of that is just speaking to your own perseverance, because what destroys, like there are two things, right, that can destroy an author in the beginning. It's like the book doesn't work, or often the book does work, but the author is in such psychological turmoil that they stop creating.
Yes, and that could have been a risk for me, because I literally had to leave university for about 2 weeks right before my final exam. I did not revise for one of my final exams at all, because I was so unwell. Like it was so terrifying, because I had this huge pressure of trying to do exams at university, which was already pressure by itself. And then the pressure of knowing I was about to be published, and after 2 years of build-up, and the thing is, it's terrifying, because your debut is not always your best novel either.
Well, it shouldn't be, right? Like you want it to be good, but hopefully your weakest in retrospect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is true of the Bone season. Like I love the Bone season, and I'm really proud of it, but I think all of my books have shown consistent improvement since then. And I think actually in a way it would have been better if I waited a couple of years and also been in a calmer environment. Like I think The Mime Order, which is the sequel, is one of those rare sequels that is like better than the first book.
Yeah.
I was in so much of a better place mentally. Like I was out of university, I'd had the terror of the Bone season's release was all done, and I was just calm, and it was a better book. Like,
so did you write it after the Bone season came out?
Do you know, I can't really remember. Like all of that time kind of got mixed, because I was so unwell with anxiety at that time. Like the whole time's kind of mixed up in my head. I remember writing it at home and working on it at home, and so it was before I moved out. It was published in 2015, so that was 2 years after the Bone season came out.
Yeah, so you were kind of still enmeshed. I know a lot of writers, I can't figure out how they do this, but will try to get as much of the series done before the first one comes out as possible.
Oh,
so
wow.
To like protect their mind or something. It's never worked for me.
No, that would not have worked for me. I would not have been in the place for it. I think I wrote like bits of the Mime Order because I had to seed certain things in the Bone season. But I think, no, mostly I finish a book and then I start. So I've just finished The Mask Falling, which is the fourth one. And I'm only going to be starting the fifth one. Oh my God. So I'm only going to be starting the fifth one once I've got another project I'm working on now, but I was not working on the fifth one while I was working on the fourth one. They have to be really separate for me.
So how far into the Bone season were you when you got the idea for Priory?
Oh gosh, this is where the songwriting comes in, because I had absolutely no intention of writing another series while I was working on the Bone season. And I'd always said, I'm going to just write this series. It's a long series. I don't need to take on two things. But the songwriting was, years later, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly went wrong in the writing of the book. I love the finished product. You would never tell from the finished book that it was so much trouble.
That's the goal, right? It's a duck.
Yeah, exactly. It's a beautiful illusion.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was working on it, and I think it became apparent that it was a mixture of my vision for it not quite lining up with Bloomsbury's vision for it, and it was also just that I think I'd slightly rushed it because I was worried about my audience getting it quickly.
Yeah.
And then it was just, and also the fact that I'd treated it like a bridge book, as I said. So in the midst of all this, it was disappearing to my editor for really long periods at a time. And I didn't have anything else to work on because I was a full-time author. So I was like, well, I might as well work on something else because I can't work on the fourth book because I don't quite know what the third book's going to look like. So I started thinking, I've always wanted to write about dragons, and I've always been really determined to reimagine the story of George and the Dragon because I don't actually know how well known it is outside the UK.
I feel like it's decently known, but I also like was schooled in UK institutions, so I'm not actually that sure, but it's also not a story that you need to know in order to enjoy Priory, but it's a cool origin story.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the story itself, like I actually take a lot of elements from the original versions of it, but I'd always wanted to retell it ever since I was a kid because it's the ultimate damsel in distress narrative, the ultimate thing that needs to be ripped apart. And also the legend itself is very disturbing when you look back on it. Like it's not just sexist, it's a whole bunch of terrible
stuff.
So I decided to start writing that, and I was writing it probably, I think through 2015 was when I started it, and then I was working on it alongside the Bone Season series. When did I sell it? Did I sell it in like 2016 maybe, I think?
Well, let's see, it came out in 18, right? Or 19?
19.
Are you serious?
Yep, it was
a long
time.
Okay,
it's so long.
Let's say 2016 because that feels 2016, 2017, right?
I think I definitely announced it in 2016, so I think maybe I was working on it in 15, and then I was working on it.
I mean, you can see why it would take time in between everything else.
Yeah, every edit was like a journey in itself. Yeah. Every structural edit, because structural edits, you just take it. I always describe structural edits as like trying to take the bone out of a body without trying to kind of open the skin.
It's tearing. It's vivisection. Like you are operating on something that you have to keep alive while you are dissecting it.
Yep.
Like it's the most neuroses-inducing process because you're like, it's like a Jenga tower that's just getting thinner and thinner, and you're like, don't let it fucking fall.
It's just a nightmare. Like it's like you've pulled out the bones and now you've just left with this awful bloody mess all over the table. It's hideous. So it's my least favorite part, and with a novel of that length, it was just absolutely awful trying to do structural edits. But anyway, so it took several years to edit it and draft it and etc. So it didn't come out until 2019. So yeah, that was when I started writing two projects at the same time.
Well, and we'll get to what it's like to juggle two projects, but before, I want to ask a little bit more about your process, because I know like part of the reason I started doing this chat series is because there is no right way. And we all work really differently. And so I'm just curious, like, what is the evolution of a story for you? You said you got the idea, you wanted to work in like this kind of epic retelling of George, of, and the dragon, but like, what did that look like? Did that look like, I know you do a lot of research, did it look like playing with voice? Did you know the plot? Do you generally know the plot? Like, just go off.
Sure. I mean, every book is different, obviously. So some, the process for me mainly, especially after the songwriting. After the songwriting, I agreed with my editor that we were always going to write a synopsis at the beginning, and we were going to talk about the synopsis before I started writing it, because often I would just plunge straight in, and my editor would have no idea what she was going to get at the end. Whereas now we were like, okay, we're going to write the synopsis. We'll agree on the main plot points, and then we will go ahead.
Very smart.
Which I really like. So I write like a broad synopsis, and then I write a detailed synopsis, so multiple pages, and then I write a chapter plan.
Okay.
So I do break mine down into chapters, and I work on a chapter by chapter basis. So the project I'm working on right now, I have 4 narrators again. So each chapter will say, I don't know, chapter 27, this narrator, this is where we are. And that's how I'm working at the moment. I mean, so it sometimes changes. Like I might find that I don't need a whole chapter to do this, so I can just break it into 2 chapters.
But it's a gift. It's a gift to future you, because it becomes a matter of executing a vision instead of being like, where am I? And what does my vision look like?
Exactly. I do like to have that kind of visual map of what I'm doing. I find it helpful. And it also helps me set goals for the day. So generally I try to write, I don't know, a chapter a day, or a section of a chapter a day. So that's really helpful. That's generally how I've been working for the last few years.
Do you write in order?
I try really hard to write in order, yeah, because for me, I need to know, I need to grow with my characters. Because I think you said once you generally know what the character looks like by the end, right? And
Yeah.
you're
I know who they are at the end,
yes.
and then I basically, in order to figure out, I rewind them and figure out who they need to be on page 1.
Yeah, I really like that. So I'm kind of similar. Like, I know where I want my character to be, but I definitely have to walk that path with them. Otherwise, if I try to skip ahead from like chapter 25 to chapter 50, I don't know what the character's been through in that time. I don't know what emotions they felt, so I don't know where they are. So that's not something I can generally do. I mean, very occasionally I will cheat. I'm just desperate to write a scene.
I was gonna say, I'm a monster who is so prone to quitting that I will just write whatever scene. But it's weird. I will pick a scene with the emotional resonance that I feel capable of handling that day. Yeah, so if I'm like having a really angry day, I will go to an angry scene and like be able to. So it's like working through the emotional authenticity, but not the emotional arc. And then I fix the emotional arc later, but I'm like, I like need to murder someone today. Let's write a fight scene. Or like there's a scene in Addie that involves like a near suicide attempt. And I just like I waited for like 3 months to even be in the place where I could write this moment.
Yeah, no, of course, that makes total sense.
Know? Yeah, but I understand that you sacrifice when you write out of order, you sacrifice the organic progression of a character's growth, especially, I guess it kind of depends on what growth arc your character is going through, whether it's like how physical or psychological or A to B or A to Z. But so you have a plan and you try and write in order. Do you generally like, have there been instances like was songwriting, did it go off book and that was part of what was difficult, or was it just like pulling teeth to get across the water?
Well, the problem with the songwriting was that I didn't really have a book to go off. I just kind of plunged in there, and because the Mime Order and the Bone Season had both really flowed out of me quite easily, I expected the same thing to happen with the songwriting, and then it was kind of a surprise to me where I kept getting a bit lost and thinking, oh, I don't know how they're going to get here. And it was kind of like I had more of a theme in mind for it. It was like, this is the book where Paige is moving between these 3 cities and doing these things, and this is what she's going to achieve. But I really needed like a driving plot to kind of link all of the scenes together, and that was what I was missing. And that was what very slowly, after much back and forth, we finally managed to construct. But yeah, it was a very difficult book. But by the end of it, I'd also written a novella alongside it called Dreamer. And by the end of the songwriting, I remember my editor sent me the Pale Dreamer to do the copy edit. And I said, I'm really sorry, I actually don't think I can do this because I can't, the words don't look like words. And I was looking at it and I was like, it's just spaghetti. Like, I can't read this. Like, I've looked at books for so long and edited books, so I had to take a massive break and then come back to it. But yeah, it was a very difficult process, but it did teach me that I need that structure. I really need that synopsis to follow. And it's been really helpful, and since it's gone quite well. I mean, the pandemic has completely changed how I write, which is a whole different issue, but generally I'm enjoying having the synopsis as my guiding.
I was going to say, it's a nice roadmap. I think often people think that having an outline or a synopsis means that you don't have the oxygen to have discovery, but I don't look at it like that at all. I don't look at it as the actual road that I'm walking. I look at it as a map that keeps me from walking off a cliff.
Right. And I've described it before as like a sort of a flesh and bones thing. Like, so I lay the bones, but the flesh, the kind of connective tissue, it grows as I write. So I will leave myself open enough that I can change things. Like, sometimes I'll be trying to push one of the characters into a situation and they're really straining against me. And generally, I've left enough room to do that. The synopsis isn't, you know, absolutely down to the finest detail. I will absolutely leave space to play with that and to discover things. But yeah, it's like, you know, knowing the destination, but not how you're going to get there, that kind of thing.
Now, I do wonder, as someone who also writes like books with multiple perspectives, do you have any cheats? Like, for me, I tend to assign one piece of music to each character, and I play that music while I'm writing that character, and it's just like kind of an auto cheat code. Like, each character has a very different theme song. Do you have anything that helps you move between the perspectives and like reorient yourself?
Interesting. I really like the music idea,
Yeah.
actually. I might try that. I do generally have music that fits each character, but I've never actually thought of kind of switching
It's
that
just a
music
quick,
on.
it's like a hack. Like I use scores, like film scores, and so I'll have like one piece of music, like a Light of the Seven by Ramin Djawadi
Yes.
from
Oh,
Game of Thrones, like,
amazing.
and I'll use that on repeat for X character, and then maybe I'll have something from like Westworld, also Ramin Djawadi, but like, or How to Train Your Dragon has like a really beautiful musical note, and so I just find that it like you can set it on repeat, and then it stays like I feel like I get to be that person, but it's really just like blinders on.
Yeah, I have that for settings, weirdly. So I have like a playlist per setting. So I suppose I do a version of that, like what setting the character's in. I'll normally change the music.
But your characters are spread out, so I feel like that does make sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, actually, that is kind of a version of what you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I've never thought of having specific things. I just seem to just switch. But yeah, I guess maybe I am doing it with the music and the settings. Maybe that's
your settings might be playing the role of character in that situation where like that's your reorientation.
Yes.
I have to know like what is the thing that you struggle with most creatively? Not besides not like publishing and expectations, but like between you and the book. Like what is the part that you struggle with and the part that you feel like you're pretty kick-ass at now?
Okay. So the part I struggle with, and this has been a result of the songwriting and the whole fiasco around that book, I have forgotten how to draft. And it is a nightmare because basically because of everything that happened with that book and the fact that it took so long to get right, I now try to write a perfect book first time. And I have totally forgotten how to write just the telling the story to yourself, the basic zero draft. So I am now agonizing over sentences that are very likely to be cut from the book. Yeah. It is. I'm so glad you do it too. Because
oh yeah. 17 books in, like I am so intolerant of my own imperfection.
Yeah, this is it. It's so like creatively sort of challenging because I'm desperately trying to get this book done and thinking like just write it, Samantha. It doesn't matter if it's not the perfect book. You just need to write it so you can get it to your editor and then you can make it beautiful afterwards. But at the moment, it's like this creative bruise I have and I haven't got over it yet. And it's, I've gone through 2 books like this and I'm on my current one and it's just an absolute nightmare. Just completely forgotten how to draft a book. So that's my main challenge at the moment. Stuff I'm pretty kick-ass at. I think I'm a pretty good world builder. I'm proud of being able to create very complex worlds that have layers to them. I think I'm pretty good at characterization as well. Like I really like to remember things that have happened to my characters and try to thread that into their character development, which sounds obvious, but stuff like, I don't know, like an injury that Paige has in book 1, she's still feeling the effects of in book 4. So
which I so appreciate, because nothing is more maddening than like when injuries have no aftermath.
Right, exactly.
You're like, did you like? And I apply that to psychological aftermath as well. Like I get so frustrated when we don't see the aftermath of actions, whether those are psychological or physical, in the subsequent books. Like I grew up in I remember Buffy was probably the first time that I saw a psychological aftermath when she comes back from the dead.
Oh, I've never seen it.
Oh, okay, well, she dies. Sorry.
Okay.
She dies several times. It's okay, but she comes back and she's completely scarred the next season from the fact she was dead.
Oh, interesting.
And it was the very first time that we got to see, in the kind of television that I watched, like actual psychological aftermaths.
Yeah, well, I think it's because obviously of the need to move the narrative on. I've actually just brought out a novella recently called The Dawn Chorus, and it was specifically about the psychological aftermath of something that happens to Paige in the book before that. And it was interesting just letting her sit with those feelings and that trauma, because we have to move the book on so quickly that sometimes it can just get swept under the carpet. And it's really important to me to keep those present and even just thinking about, for example, she has multiple bad experiences with water in the songwriting, and so now she has a fear of water.
Good.
I've tried to think
not good.
about.
I'm sorry, Paige, but it's important. It's important. It tracks through.
Yeah, and it wasn't even something I'd planned necessarily. It's just something I noticed that happened to her multiple times. And I was like, okay, so I need to think about how this might affect her character.
Yeah.
So yeah, I pride myself on that, and I hope that my characters feel real and vivid and like real people. So yeah.
They do. But also, I so completely agree with the self-sabotaging component of trying to, because it's a fallacy. Like it is impossible to write a perfect first draft. I always say that like writing the first draft is like taking this idea out of your head, chucking it as far away from yourself as you can, and then revision is the process of walking toward it.
Yes.
You know? But like we just have this idea that like after a certain amount of time and books, we should be able to do it right the first time. And
yeah.
and it's just like you have to write it wrong before you can write it right. And I know this. I preach this. And when I sit down to work on what is now my 22nd book, I sit there and I futz with like one word in page 4.
Every
and
time.
Knowing that I'm going to delete this whole fucking book and it doesn't matter. I still like, I'm convinced I'm going to do it right the first time.
Yeah, every single time. It's the most frustrating thing at the moment. I'm trying every single day, sitting down and saying, Samantha, just write the chapter. I don't care about that word. Just write it. I've started actually trying to put little brackets in. So whenever I pause to kind of think about a word, I just put in brackets, word, think about later.
Does it work?
No, not really. I'm trying so hard. I've got little bracket chapters, but then I just go back and I toy with the bracket. It's like,
I can't do it.
Yeah, so that's really
if I'm not excited, the problem is I also think if one, I keep looking at the finished book that I have before. So now I'm looking at Addie, being like, fuck. Because like no matter what I do, I'm already self-sabotaging. Like, well, people are already like rereading Addie. So like what if nobody wants to reread the book that I'm writing right now? Like now it's a failure. I haven't even written it yet. So like, we go through so many weird self-sabotaging moments, but I do feel like the better you get at writing, the better you feel you should get at writing a first draft. And it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and also we're forgetting we literally have professional editors who have got our final drafts to the point that they're at. And like you can't, no matter how great you are as an author, you can never sort of mimic the collaboration of working with an editor. And so it's something I keep reminding myself, and I still haven't got over it. So
I have post-it notes everywhere basically saying just write it. Like just literally just write something down on paper. It just write it. It doesn't matter.
Why is it so hard?
I don't know. So I do want to know, especially because like times are very strange right now, what do you do to either refill the creative well or find balance or create grace or just give yourself space?
Oh, I wish I'd been doing that at the moment. It's been difficult because at the beginning of this year, this was going to be the year I got my balance right. And it was going to be the year that I took.
I remember. I saw your like to-do list, and I was like, I feel motivated.
Oh yeah, no, that went down the toilet as soon as the pandemic happened. Like I was like, I'm going to have my Thursday, and I'm going to protect my Thursday with my life, and that is going to be the day that I do admin, and I refill the well, and I watch TV, and I read books. And somehow I've just lost it because basically I figured out I could not work out why I was working so badly during the pandemic, because generally speaking, I've been very lucky and my life has not really changed.
Yeah.
So I was like, why is it so hard for me to write this book? And I think it's a combination of the book being really long, the book being about a pandemic, and also the fact that I wasn't able to move around. I am a writer who wanders and I have not been able to wander beyond the limits of my own home for ages. So it's really stagnated, and that's made me panic because my deadlines, I've had to change deadlines a couple of times, and I was so determined that 2020 I was going to hit every single deadline, and I haven't, and it's made me really kind of upset, and it means that I've kept pushing my Thursday back. So I feel really kind of like I need to refill the well, but I feel like I'm not giving myself the time to do that. And I know it's so important for me to do that. So
it is, but also because it just becomes like a cycle of self-flagellation where you're just punishing yourself for essentially being human, and it sucks. And also as somebody who like the biggest adjustments of this thing, beside the fact I'm living with my family in another country, is like I never write at home. I write in coffee shops, and I usually write in like 2 to 3 coffee shops over the course of a day, and I move between those coffee shops. I've trained home to be home, not a workspace, or else there would be no boundaries. And now I have to write books at home.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really hard because you can't refresh your surroundings. And
No.
and it just stagnates. And it's been even weirder for me because normally I have an office in my home that I
Yeah.
can move into. But I made the stupid mistake of starting to get my apartment painted just as the pandemic hit. So, and for various mishaps, I don't have an available office at the moment.
Yeah.
So I've just been working at my kitchen table. So yeah, that's been a little bit
And
stressful.
I do acknowledge to everyone watching, like, these are small problems.
Oh
These
yeah,
are
no,
very small
absolutely.
problems. But when your whole job, when you're self-employed and your job requires that you create structure
Yeah.
in your life, there's nobody standing over you creating structure, like you have to reinforce structure. When things start falling down, it becomes even harder for you to create the necessary frameworks to write.
Exactly.
You know? And so, like, yes, it's a minor problem compared to like being safe and sheltering, and it's a discomfort. And like, I don't know about you, but I find I'm still working, but I'm working at about a quarter of my normal pace.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right, actually. Like, I'm definitely getting stuff done. Like, I am creating a manuscript. There are words there, and I'm slowly crawling towards my target. But I think it was because I had such an ambitious target. Like, I was going to write a chapter every single day.
Well, that's insane, Samantha.
I was trying. I did okay at the beginning of the year. I was doing pretty well, but I was also able to move at the beginning of the year, like you do. I was going between cafes and stuff, and I was finding workspaces and just kept refreshing my energy every time. Because I just haven't been able to do that. I've just been crawling along, and my gym reopened a couple of days ago, and they're doing like socially distanced seating, and I sat down and I wrote like 2,000 words.
It's like, amazing, right?
Yeah, this is it. This is what I've been missing during the pandemic. This is the main thing that's been changing the way I work. So it's nice to sort of slowly feel that opening back up again, but
it's surreal.
Uncertainty.
I don't know. I've taken over like the house next door to my parents' house, which is like was a little Airbnb or sheet. Mm-hmm. And every time I finish a project though and start a new project, I've had to take the kitchen table and move it physically to a different part of this tiny little apartment because I can't stare. Like, I can't be in the same place and write a film script and a TV show. And like, and so I'm just like trying to create. And one time I asked my parents, who are very lovely retired people, if they would like fake a coffee shop. I said, can we just set up I just want to set up a table in the garden. Can we just pretend? And they were so fucking mocking.
Oh my God.
They came out and they were like, Madame, and I was like, screw you, I just want a cup of coffee. And then
I want ambient noise.
They brought me a bill at the end. Like, they brought me an actual bill, and I was like, this is extortionate. Like,
that's like adorable.
It was cute, but I never did it again because it was just like they made me feel so silly, and I was like, I'm just trying to pretend. I have like the Rainy Mood app on my phone,
God,
and it has a cafe desktop sound.
I've used it, yeah.
And I'm ashamed at how much it helps.
I need a clinking teaspoon in the background, damn it.
Barista in the background, and I feel like embarrassed by the fact that it works.
Yeah, no, it does. So do you switch like depending on the project you're working on? That's what makes you switch space.
Yeah, when I finish, so I weirdly can't work on multiple things at the same time. I try and split my day and work on X in the morning and Y in the afternoon. And every time what happens is I end up chipping away a tiny bit at each one, finishing neither, and feeling an immense amount of self-loathing.
Right.
So even though I have like 6 deadlines, I work on one thing at a time.
Yeah. And
so when I finish something, I have to like find a way to change the environment, because I would normally write, like, I would pick a coffee shop and that would become the primary coffee shop for my book. Mm-hmm. And then I would change coffee shops for the next book. And so I'm like creating a fake tiny trip around the world. Yeah, well, it's like one room apartment.
Yeah, well, it's just immersion, I guess. Like, I have the same thing where I need to just work on one project at a time, because sometimes people will say to me, so are you working on the next bonus season book and the next Priory project? And I'm like, oh no, it's way too different for me. Like, one minute I'm in like the year 2016 Paris, and the next thing I'm with dragons in like a weird version of medieval.
I think with fantasy, it's almost impossible to juggle. The one year that I wrote
two books in two different worlds in the same time, I had to rewrite both of them in the end because they were too close and neither one was right. Like my YA became too adult, my adult became too YA, the voices, and it just wasn't, and it sucked. Like I was in graduate school, so I was like, I'll just write A Gathering of Shadows and This Savage Song at the same time. And I had to rewrite both books.
Oh no, that's awful.
So never again. I'd rather be on continuous tight deadline and work on one thing.
Yeah, it's just that creative bleed you get between the two things. You're in the same mindset. So
also, so many people in the comments are gonna keep mentioning the fact that you keep hinting at a Priory related project. Obviously, we're not going to talk about it because it's not official. Do you have any sense when you're going to be allowed to talk about the Priory related project because everybody is asking?
Next year. I found out I can't talk about it.
You are so mean. You've been talking about it this whole time. Okay, so but people can say that you are hinting that there will be something more in the Priory related world.
I think probably people have already guessed what it is because I've been basically, but I can't not talk about what I'm working on. I find it so hard. So it's, you know, I'm sure you know the feeling because you've got so many things bubbling away.
I can't not
talk about it. So I've been like, oh yes, there's another book coming in the Priory world. Really obviously hinting.
Everyone can bookmark. And no, I don't understand people who will be like, by the way, I wrote this book and it comes out in 2 months. And I'm like, how did you not talk about the fact you were writing it? I literally talk about everything I'm doing.
I know, it's so hard, and like you can't sort of officially talk about things. Like it's like that joke in publishing, you know, it's everything's 2 years away all the time.
It's already happened.
But yes, I can talk about it next year. So check back in a year's time.
Well, you know what? 2020 has proven to just be like a weird non-year bingo. So like it's gonna be good. Next year will be here before we know it.
I think it's going to be wonderful next year. I'm very excited about it. I hope so badly that it's going to
be. I hope so. I have to ask you a hard question. This is the last question.
Okay.
And it's always hard. And I guess I've made it slightly easier with the third option. But basically, I always ask anyone who has like more than one book out, if you only got to choose one of your works to outlive you, because we don't actually get to control, right? We don't get to control what's the most popular, and we don't get to control what's the most received, and we don't get to control what that is compared to what we love. So having to choose between Bone Season and Priory, only one gets to outlive you, with the caveat that actually, I'm not gonna give you a caveat. I'm gonna choose between those two.
Oh, you're gonna be mean. Okay. But that's really hard because it's funny because I've got such strong reactions to both the Bone Season and Priory, like often quite different reactions, but also similar because
the Venn diagram.
Yes, exactly. It's like it's a lot of people. It's meant a lot to them personally. It's meant a lot to them on some level of it's spoken to something about themselves. So it would be very difficult either way. I mean, with Priory, for example, I get more people contacting me about the fact that it's queer and they see themselves in the queerness, and that means a lot to me because I realized I was queer while I was writing it. But the Bone Season, similarly, people see a lot of themselves in Paige, like the fact that Paige is demisexual, for example. So oh my god, this is such a mean question.
I know
I think it's difficult because I think the Bone Season I think when the series is finished, my instinct is that it will be probably my best overall work, just as it's in terms of how experimental it is and how I don't know, there's something about it. Like Priory is it's about deconstructing tropes, I suppose, Priory. Whereas the Bone Season is about it is also about deconstructing tropes. I'm not sure. I think overall the Bone Season is perhaps a more unique story, whereas Priory is playing with a classic.
Okay, but that's not what I asked.
I know, I'm trying to work it out.
You could choose emotionally which one you would have outlive you.
This is so hard. Okay, oh my god. This is really
I promise they're both probably gonna outlive you. You just have to think about because I think about the fact that I had an experience with Addie where once I finished Addie, I thought to myself, if I never write again, I'm okay with that because I've written this. And up until that moment, so the caveat I normally add is if you feel you haven't written the thing yet that you want to outlive you, you can say that. But Priory and Bone Season have such distinct perspectives and differing audiences that I feel like trying to rationalize, but I feel like it's just a heart thing. Like, which one would you like if you got to time travel forward past your own life into a bookstore 100 years from now and you went to your name on the shelf, which book would you be happier to see there?
I think probably, oh man, this is so hard because it's like, I think, I keep trying to rationalize it.
I know, you can't rationalize it though.
It's so weird because they both mean so much to me. I guess The Bone Season, because it sounds cliche, but it's the story I feel like I was kind of meant to tell, and that's why it was the first story I wrote. And I think, like I said, I think when it's a complete series, I think it will be my best piece of work. So I think that's probably why I would want it to endure as an example of the kind of work I would write. But at the same time, it's like Priory, it would be awful.
But this is an interesting thing, right? By the time you finish the Bone Season books, they will have been written over the course of more than a decade of your life.
Exactly.
And that is, I mean, that's a major psychological commitment. They will, because as you said, the books are getting stronger because you're continuing to grow as a writer. And this is something that we always hope happens as a writer. But when you have a long running series, it's something we get to see happen as a reader. Because I think so often readers forget that like the book becomes a static object and the author continues to grow. Exactly. So like it might be a really fascinating thing once the Bone Season is fully a complete set to be able to track the growth of Samantha Shannon circa age 22 to like age 32.
Exactly. And I think that is why I feel that way as well, because I've always, when I look back on the Bone Season, I think, oh, my voice sounded so much younger and so much sort of less, you know, I had less writing experience, but at the same time, that's kind of nice because it's like me and Paige are growing together.
You grew together.
So she's getting older and I'm getting older. So it will be really fascinating to see, just to read them and see the development of my writing. So it'll be kind of like a little time capsule.
I love that.
So, yeah, so that's why, whereas Priory is so important to me, and I think that it would be great if it was still in bookshops in 100 years, but it's sort of a section of my life, and I think each Priory book, because it's a standalone, it would be like a snapshot of that moment, whereas the Bone Season is this
it's actually going to be a through line.
Exactly, yeah. So that, I think that, yeah, it's a very difficult question. And
I was going to say, it's a hard question, but I think that's a really beautiful answer and way of looking at it, because it's something that's still such a continuation point for you. And normally, like, I look back at my work and I can see my own growth from book to book, but they're often disconnected books.
Right.
You know, at the most, I see my growth over 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
You will get to have this object, which really does track your evolution as a writer and your evolution through your identity. I mean, I can see through my books my own coming out.
Oh, yes.
You will be able to see your own coming out through one series.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can see sort of me connecting with my queerness and that coming through the characters. Absolutely. So I think that's my answer. It was hard.
Awesome. Samantha Shannon, you are an absolute joy, and I'm so glad that you emerged from the Sam Shannon shell, and you had this moment with me, and I'm just really grateful that you did it.
Oh no, thank you so much for having me. Like I said, it's been so nice to talk to like a fellow creative and just chat and finally just connect with an audience again. It's been a very long time in the pandemic without doing anything, so this has been such a lovely evening. And
of course.
And also congratulations on Addie. I'm so excited.
Oh God. 2 months. It's fine. It's only, like, we're talking about 10 years of a life. It was just 10 years of my life. That's all. It's totally fine.
Oh, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing.
Well, I hope I get to see your face in person soon. If not, I hope to get to see you on here again soon. We'll come up with another excuse to chat. For everyone watching, this will live on IGTV, and then it will be archived over on YouTube. You can find it forever. Samantha Shannon, have a wonderful evening.
You too. Have a great evening.
Good
Bye.
night.